All right. Well, I am seeing my computer says 6. So, welcome to the City Council Budget Finance Committee meeting Thursday, May 21st for the City of Lake Forest Park. We're called to order. Any comments on the agenda? Hearing none, agenda is approved. Unanimous consent. I have a thing to read about public comments, but I do not see anyone in the room at this time. So I will bypass public comment today. So there's no one here to give it. Director's report. Director Vaughn, would you like to walk us through your reports and the key exciting items that we need to know about?
Yeah, yes. So as we buy a little bit of time to pull up the report to all look at together. Perfect. So this is the new financial report that we put together, and this is based on by fund level. So again, the original adopted budget, the amended budget, revenue and expenditures are actual to date with 25 and 26 numbers, and just being able to look at each fund as a percentage on revenues and expenditures at a line item basis. And I don't think there's anything really of note unless there are questions.
Oh, could you remind us, what is our target percentage for this month?
So our target percentage out there in rogue and not labeled, I know, just noticed, is 67%.
Got it.
So is our target percentage for the month of April. Again, remember that this is a biennial, so you already have 2025 completed, and then 2026 we're 4 months in. And so this is through April. And I actually did notice that there is one fund towards the bottom that is at 100%. And I just want to highlight that that's at 100% because it's completed. We have paid that debt off in 2025. And so that is that's done. So that is the one that that probably you might have a question on, just at a high level. So I'm just going to pause and ask if anybody has any questions. And if you have a question after the fact, of course, please know that you're welcome to email me at ask me.
Yeah, it's so the repayment, that's the Fund 407.
That is correct.
Okay.
And that was our debt for sewer, our revenue debt. It's considered revenue debt. And that was paid off in 2025.
Okay, thank you.
And actually, yeah, to date, the city, until we engage in the additional debt for the roundabout that we requested, the $2.5 million there, but at this point, the city doesn't have any outstanding debt.
Woohoo!
Thank you. Thank you for that excitement.
Okay, then get up on the table and dance.
I know. I'm always looking for the feel-good story. There is your feel-good story. Your financial feel-good story. Okay, so if there aren't any questions, let's just go ahead and walk right into the general fund. And so just walking through the general fund on the expenditure side at the department levels. And actually, I just remembered that I think at the last meeting you asked for me to put the department numbers, and I love it when you recall that was a request when you were presenting. So I will make note to put the department numbers on the next report.
Much appreciated.
Within that, so walking through again, the city council is at 64%, executive is at 64%. Legal services is trending higher, and that is due to the hearing that the city has been engaged with. And so that is going to come forward to you on your next budget amendment in order to increase that budget for those services. Walking down, the municipal services department is at 65%. The elections is over at 113%. However, that is an annual cost. So we've already paid for the elections. That happens normally in the first quarter of a year. So January or the first quarter-ish. So that is has been paid for 2026. And then city memberships, that one doesn't really trend on the operating percentage, because most of your city memberships are an annual basis. So it's not going to trend perfectly with the operationals. And there's no concern on that one. The finance department is at 58.7. The state audits, if you remember, we just completed this year, actually, our 2023 and 2024. And our next audit is estimated to start in about the October timeframe. We will have to evaluate that and see if it is necessary in order to expand that budget for this next budget amendment. So you may see that on the next, the future budget amendment. The municipal court, that is at 52. The prosecutor and public defense, that's at 40%. I do want to note that we have quite a few invoices outstanding on that on the prosecutor side, so that you will probably be seeing trued up in the next month or two. So that is going to go up. And in addition, from the last council meeting, when City Administrator Hill presented on that, that too is going to require a budget amendment. But what I want to highlight is that budget amendment is going to tie to the traffic safety fund, the 002, because the previous amendment that we did increased the general fund, and there is, as he described in his presentation at the last council meeting, that there is a traffic safety component to that now, to that new contract. So that's where you will see that come forward. And the police department is at 65.8%. And I'm just going to share that due to 2 upcoming retirements, you will be seeing an amendment on that, because we are really tight on that budget being 66.7%, and the bulk of the police department, the bulk of their budget is salaries and benefits. And so when we have these large retirement payouts, that we're doing a better job budgeting for those, but these really large ones, they do hit. So that's to be forthcoming. And then let's see where we're at. Crime Watch and community policing, that's at 75%. That's just carried over from some supplies that was in 2025 that was purchased. Emergency management, that's an annual basis. So that's where we pay for our NEMCO. And so that is an annual basis. So that is not one to be concerned about. And let's see, where was I? Emergency management, the traffic safety cameras. Again, this is just tied to the general funds, traffic safety cameras, and that's just the expense. Then dispatch is a quarterly basis, so that is always going to trend. They're going to ask for their payment from Norcom ahead of time, so that's not going to trend perfectly on an operational or a month-to-month operational basis. Then the Civil Service Commission, that's at 90%, and I will have to check in on that to see if that's something that you're going to see on a future budget amendment, because as you continue to see at council meetings, we are continuing to hire and promote within our police department as retirements are occurring and as vacancies are opening up. So the environmental services, so that is where we have the tree account. And so I did break out, so there's a couple things under the environmental services, but the tree account, the two tree accounts for professional services and supplies are both under that. And so I've broken that out separately, so it's very visual to see, as that continues to be an ongoing question. And then detention services, that's under at 44%. The community programs, that's where the city supports all of our community partners, is what I'll call them. That's where we pay for those. Public health is at 52.8%. Our community development, which is our planning and our building department, we recently revamped that into being a community development department, but we still hold our financials and show them separately, even though it's now under one umbrella. And so the planning is at 60% and the building department is at 57.5%. The parks maintenance is at 47.7%. So that's trending on. And then the facilities maintenance is trending at 56.6%. And then our shared services, so that is meaning our internal service funds, our vehicle support, and then our IT 501, or 501 is the vehicle and equipment maintenance support. 502 is our IT fund, and 101 ties directly to our street fund. And the street fund is only on there currently right now in order to support the street maintenance lighting. That is the money comes into the general fund, but it really is, the expenditures are paid out of the street fund, so that transfer has to take place. And that concludes my overview of the departmental general fund. Are there any questions?
Just maybe a thought on the parks maintenance. So that's down a bit, but I understand, I think we do a lot of work in the summer, and so that there may be kind of a peak usage in the summer. Is that what you see typically, Director Vaughn?
I might have to circle back, because I think we amended that. Yeah, I think that budget was going over, and then at the mid-buy, we amended it to increase that budget, but I'm gonna have to maybe circle back with what exactly we did within the parks fund that we increased, that we went over.
Okay.
I'm not 100% sure on that, so let me circle back.
And we have Director Heaton next month with do we do quarterly?
Yes. I
So maybe
will.
she has a thought that she can bring with her next month.
Yeah, no, I can definitely, we can, between the two of us. I will go back and circle back. I just can't remember that detail off the top of my head, but I do know that between parks and facilities, we did amend those. I just can't remember the detail of that.
I just want to make sure we're using that money, for our parks.
Oh, absolutely.
So just what that schedule might be, and just make sure that we're on schedule, basically, for the usage of those funds. Okay. Any comments from the committee members or my colleagues? Hearing none, we'll go to the other funds.
Okay, so walking into the other funds, again, it's built out the same exact way. So the street fund, that is trending on the maintenance portion is 56.5. The street operations is at 42.3. And the internal service transfers, which that's our cost allocation mainly. And then the transfers is back to the same concept of supporting the vehicles, and because Public Works, actually that's the same for the sewer and the surface water, so I'll just kind of quickly give that overview again. The internal service funds and the transfers are the support of the allocation of their portion of the vehicle and equipment replacement program. So all of the funds that they're tied to as Public Works pays their portion into those internal service funds to support the vehicles, and like fuel will go into the internal service funds and be paid for out of that fund. And then walking down to the sewer utility fund, that is trending at 66%. So that is right on target. So that will probably need some closer review to see where we are so close on that fund. So there may be some budget amendment items that come out of that. And then the surface water utility fund is at 50% for the operations, and then the transfers are at 51%. Are there any questions?
Seeing none from my committee or colleagues, I think. Oh, I have one over here. Member Goldman?
Yes, thanks. This might be a question for Director Heaton. So when a fund like, for instance, the surface water is only at 49% rather than 67%, is that a sign that we are saving money on our projects? Or is it a sign that we're not delivering projects as fast as we had expected? And I guess that's a Director Heaton question.
I can answer it.
Oh.
I would be happy to answer it. So this is your operational fund. So these are the operations, meaning, and so what that probably means is that you have some, my best educated guess at this point in time, which I think is probably pretty good. I believe that on an annual basis, we have a Department of Ecology requirement. So we budget a significant amount for catch basin cleaning, inspections. And so that work probably just doesn't normally happen until the end of basically every fiscal year. And so that work will hit in probably the fourth quarter of that year. So it's not that it's under budgeted, it's just that the timing of when those really large expenditures will basically show up on the expense reports.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that.
And I think there are not any other questions.
Okay. And then I think we can transition into old business, which is continuing our discussion around financial outlook and budgeting strategies. We have the spreadsheet coming up in a moment. So I want to talk briefly two things. One, what we need to identify and define in order for us to say kind of this whole process is kind of done, and then we can move on to the next process, which is how do we get it moving out of this ideation phase. So we needed to determine what our reserve was, and we did take care of that 16%. We all figured that out, and we're doing it off of expenditures or revenue, whichever is higher. So we got that already taken care of. We looked at our strategic opportunity fund and wanted it to match closely with the 16% revenue. So we've got that identified as to what we want in there. And in our case, because we had some in the count already, we are just adding 1.6 to bring it to the point of the coming consistent with the 16%, kind of to match our reserve amount. So those two things are done. We've got those resolved. The one thing I've been sort of poking into your guys' ears a few times over the last few weeks is trying to understand what is our target ending balance. So what happens at the end of 3132, that's puts us in a position we're comfortable going into in 2033. I don't think any of us want to plan for a problem. If we're going to go through this process, let's plan for a good solution. So that needs to be kind of worked through, and that is council needs to determine kind of what our place is with the assistance of Director Bond, understanding the implications of our decisions. Once we've got that, then we have an opportunity to then find out what is the levy rate that gets us to our target and see where we are with that, and we're all comfortable with that. One thing that has changed in this spreadsheet is you'll notice we have an additional general fund expenditures. Things have gotten really expensive recently. And they've been getting really expensive for a while. And again, these numbers were coming from the 2024. When we were doing the budgeting for 25-26, that 6-year outlook kind of was developed at that time. And that was a while ago. So re-looking at what is a more responsible expected expenditures for these next 3 bienniums. Obviously, we know that the gas prices are going up, and basically everything is trying its best to go up. So Director Vaughn and I worked through, and do you want to talk about what you are showing us here today?
Yes, so I want to go, I just want to revisit a couple things for the spreadsheet. So the general fund revenue and the general fund expenditures, those are built, those numbers are directly from the 6-year forecast that were I'm just going over this in case somebody sound bites this one meeting that we have it locked in, so there's not confusion. So it does sometimes feel like I'm repeating myself, but for those individuals that do that, I just want to make sure that they're having accurate information on where these numbers are coming from. So the general fund revenue and the general fund expenditures are based off of the 6-year forecast. Further conversations have opened up a possibility of evaluating, and there are 2 spreadsheets, one that is in blue that we're viewing now, and the other one tab at the bottom, the purple one is building in about a 1.5% additional, we're just going to call it a CPI, so additional expenditures across the whole fund. And so the thought process behind that was in order to capture the increased costs. If you look at the shaded area below the 27-28, if you go straight down from basically column HI, right down there where the cursor is, there is a CPI at 1.5%. It's being highlighted on this within the blue or the top line items between lines 11 to 14. And basically what's being shown there is, and I think that's part of the discussion that we wanted to bring forward tonight, because that is a change on this spreadsheet, but very clearly trying to highlight what the intention was behind that, to invite a little bit of a conversation before you move to the next one. Then very clearly trying to outline the delta of that, the cost of adding additional 1.5% on the expenditures is just shy of 550,000. So annually, that's about 225,000. And I tried to break that out very specifically so you can, it's very easy to walk through. So that is the basis of that portion of the general fund expenditures, adding the CPI, adding some additional safety net for the expenditures that have gone up. Again, I do want to remind you that when we built the 6-year forecast, we had very granular increases to each line item. I can tell you benefits is 8%, because benefits for employees continue to go up at a higher rate than some of the other items that we are seeing. When we built the forecast, we weren't in the fuel situation that we're in currently, and we weren't realizing a much higher cost. So there are some items out there that are going up. And I think this is just opening the conversation if that's appropriate to include that in this, or if it's more appropriate to leave this budget spreadsheet as it was, and then we can go back to the purple tab and go from there. So I think that's,
Yeah, and I think we talked about just adding that one-time bump to 27-28. And then that would just carry through the next 2 biennium, so it's not, so each one gets a 1.5% bump, so we're not escalating it excessively, we just are acknowledging that
Yeah.
it's unlikely those prices will go back down in any meaningful way. We picked 1.5, it just was a starting point for this discussion, so I'll open it
Yeah.
to my council,
Yes, I have a
committee
question.
members.
Okay, so a potential real world problem might be when the town center gets hit with traffic impacts, and it might impact vendors. I don't know how much money we get from taxes or from their sales. But would the 1.5%, do you think, cover losses if you know, because it you know, 522, it's gonna last potentially for 4 years. So just a question. If
Okay, so are you looking at revenue or the expenses? Cause we were just,
well, I guess I'm considering revenue, but I guess I'm concerned about all of it. So I would just want us to be prepared to be able to withstand gas going up, more, maybe it'll double. What will happen if, some of our friends at center are impacted? Will this budget be sustainable through something like that?
That's a very hard projection, I think, to make.
Yeah.
But I think I agree there will be some impact while the construction is in its peak phases. But we did not look at revenue adjustments on this, just the expenditure side, because that seems something that we could more kind of anticipate how it might feel. We revisit the budget every year, so we have the chance to also kind of
Long
adjust
as
when
it's
we
a
know
top of
more.
mind somewhere.
No, it's on there.
every single budget cycle, and we're kind of probably walking into in about the June timeframe, I will start digging in pretty heavily to all of the revenue projections of where we think, it won't just be myself, it'll be our team, where we think we're gonna end up on all fronts. So as part of the budget process, it's the revenues on where we think we're gonna end 2026. So we're gonna be estimating all of those in addition with all of the expenditures to kind of see where it all falls together. And so I do think that in this example, we were only keeping in mind the expenditure side. However, the revenue side, you're bringing up a great point. There has been a lot of new legislation with sales tax, et cetera, on what is being charged, certain taxes that haven't in the past, and how all of those pieces are going to fall. Even the larger cities are just saying we're going to have to wait to evaluate real data because we're not sure how to even project it and come up with a forecast that even seems like it's close. And so that's coming from the larger cities, even saying that it's just going to be a challenge.
As long as we're
Break to, Councilmember Muhlenberg?
What is the mix of our income? Do we have visibility into how much of our revenue comes from property taxes versus sales taxes? And for the sales taxes, do we know what percentage of them come from the town center?
So yes, we do know on the front as far as where our percentage, like how our city is made up as far as taxes, sales tax. However, when you get into sales tax, that is very protected on not being able to go super granular on it. So and that's to protect organizations and etc. So yes, we do have in your current budget, you have a full breakdown of all of the revenues and what makes up even the general fund. I was looking really quickly to see if I could quote a page.
But we don't have that by commercial zone. We just have the
No.
breakout by revenue type.
Correct.
Page
It is
31.
Yeah.
And thank you for that. And yeah, so you can walk through and you can do taxes, it's general fund, and it's broken down on each line item, property sales, affordable housing, it walks through by line item.
About 10-ish, maybe
Mhm.
line items.
And then does it for each one, so taxes, licenses, and permits, that's all under the general fund, and it'll go by each category.
All right. Thank you.
Councilmember Goldman.
Just a question about the spreadsheet, very specific question. Line 13, is that meant to be the same number in each biennium of 30.4 million?
No. Quick answer, simple. It's supposed to be tied to. How did that happen? Yeah. Can you? Oh, I was gonna say, is there a 34? Yes, 32. So yes.
Is it meant to be that
Um,
row 13 is meant to be row
It's-
12 times
Times
one, well, plus 1.5%?
1.015. Yeah.
Correct. And it looks like it did it correctly, and so I apologize for that. And that is a great catch. So okay, column 13 or row 13, excuse me, is supposed to match 32. Yep. And then that is supposed to match that one. Yep. Great catch and apologies.
I wish it wasn't a mistake because that has
It
made
did
the
not,
financial picture much less rosy.
I
Yeah.
do feel like that red color at the bottom is appropriate.
Yes, Councilmember Bertani.
Okay, thanks. And thanks for updating the spreadsheet. The other thing I was wondering about is where's the 1.5% CPI coming?
It was just an additional, and that's,
Oh, and the figure itself,
what do you?
because I
Sorry.
understood the CPI to be much higher, like the
Correct,
last
it
one was
is.
3.8.
It-
So is it conservative to go with that number or conservative to make it higher?
So the conversations that were
I was gonna say, so that the original CPI is in there, this is adding on
Oh,
top of,
okay,
to accommodate
gotcha,
the
okay.
extra that
Gotcha.
we didn't know about back when we were thinking about the original CPI.
So then what is, we had a CPI of
I think it was 3.
3.
so your actual 6-year forecast wasn't built off of just a flat CPI number.
Yeah.
It was granularly built off of what we thought revenues and expenditures would accurately be doing for the next biennium. So you're just gonna see different numbers. Your projection factors are gonna be like 5.37. They're gonna be very specific to each line item. And so it's just gonna be, and then, like I said, there's a couple in there that, like for your benefits, I remember that one to be specifically 8%. But most of your other ones are at 5.37. So the idea, that was why I was trying to walk you through our thought process prior to putting this together, was that the additional it was an additional safety net. And may or may not be appropriate. That's part of what the discussion was trying to invite this evening.
Thank you.
But I agree that I'm not sure that 1.5% would be enough.
Let's look at room.
Yeah, so that was just about 500,000
Yeah.
That's fine.
additional costs that we were kind of suggesting as a starting point for the
Right.
conversation. Didn't come from any specific adding of specific costs. Just kind of where we feel we have undervalued some things.
And just to remind everybody out there that it's not that we're buying a basket full of groceries that families do, and that's not where the CPA, it's because we're gonna have to pay our police more, It's because we're gonna have to pay basically more for liability insurance. It's all these places where there's these indirect things that the CPI affects. Because ultimately, somebody pays the basket of groceries and that kind of stuff. We just basically get the back end of that, so, yeah.
Yeah, and then there are a lot of costs that the city ends up paying for that are we have control over, and then there's quite a few that we don't. We don't have control over our jail costs. We don't have control over when the legislative makes a different decision, as this was brought up last night with the defense. Why am I drawing a blank? The defense.
Indigent defense.
The indigenous defense. And so their caseload, the cost is over triple. And so when decisions are made, it does have a financial impact to our cities, but not because we weren't tightening our belt and being aware and conscious of the costs. It was a decision that was made that had an unfunded mandate. You hear that term often, and it's another one of those examples. And so it really does lead the city into a challenging expenditure standpoint of navigating how to be able to support those on the revenue side.
Well, that's the question, is 1.5% enough?
Nobody has a crystal ball.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, but do we leave it at 1.5% or should it be 2%?
And
Just a question.
I would recommend that this is in addition to what is already in. This is on top of. So a 6-year forecast. And so I mean, I think I think the city, I always hesitate to overstate because we are going to have our gas situations where the fuel costs, I shouldn't just say gas, fuel and diesel fuel costs are going up or have gone up. But there might be other areas that don't go up at that level. So when you use one example to take the whole thing and increase it, it's only fair to look at the whole picture. And when we do something like we're asking for 1.5% across the general fund, we want to be mindful of not stating too much and being, I guess I'm trying to be optimistic about. I'm trying to be a little bit optimistic. I know, right? From finance, be a little optimistic about going too far with increasing the expenditures.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's only so much we can do. And this is a balancing game, right? So the more that we put onto the expenditures, the more revenue we have to find to offset it. And I think we want to stay as realistic as possible, but not go, all too far. This isn't an intention to try to do a money grab. We really do see these expenditures increasing.
Well, I don't see
Right.
it. I honestly
You know-
don't see it as a money grab. I think that the possibility of costs going up
Even further.
even further is very high.
Yes,
Just based on what's happening in the world.
Yeah. So if we leave it at the 1.5 for now as a tool, did I see a hand?
Yeah, it was.
Councilmember Rosenau, did you have a hand up?
No, I mean, I maybe it's already been said. I think I'm especially thinking about. I know that like the costs of road construction have gone up for all sorts of reasons over the last few years. The war in Iran and the disruption to fuel supplies there, it's going to affect asphalt, it's going to affect shipping, it's going to affect all sorts of things, and we don't know how long any of that's going to last. So yeah, I think there's no way to predict all of this. There's local factors like that, and we don't know how, as the millionaires tax plays out, whether there will be further either more money coming from the state is always welcome, but also more cuts to sales taxes to make those less regressive, which we can hope for, but also unpredictable effects here. So I think I appreciate everyone being conservative about this, and I think I'm glad to see this because it is a thing that I've been sort of worrying about and trying to figure out how we were going to handle it. So I'm glad that we're handling it.
Thank you. So it seems like the 1.5% is a good place for us to be working at right now. So the next question, and as you can see, once we put that slight escalation in, we are by the end of 2029, we will have just our reserve, give or take, and by the end of 2030, we will have essentially spent our reserve. We've got a minus of 2.7 million and only 2.5 left in our reserve, so that would be overdrawn. And counts don't like to be overdrawn, so I've been told. And we got a $6 million hole at the end. And even though that's not a good place to be, but I think it is a bit more accurate. So the next question that we have to ask is that -6, what should that look like? What is something that is a comfortable spot for us to target with the spreadsheet? Reality will be very different, but for what we know now, with the information we know now, what is a good amount to have above our reserve that gives us hopefully the chance of some stability going into the next biennium? I know Director Vaughn has mentioned that there's a certain kind of 1.2 million that is kind of useful for the cash flow, kind of balancing out those cash flows to be able to have that amount that's fluid for her. So I would say, given that, we don't want to be any less than that. Do my committee members have any thoughts as to what you might want to have as an ending balance?
Remember last year when we were going through this, a bare minimum was 6 or 7 million. But that was the way that we were doing it last year.
Mhm.
So I don't know how that extrapolates to how we're doing this now.
So I think one of the goals one of the comments we heard a lot last year was, we want you to spend your money and then we'll help out. We don't want to be the sole person holding and closing that structural gap. So I think having that lower than the 6 million is, I think, what our community would be expecting. And I think we can do that somewhat reasonable, a much more reasonable lower number. And that way we can put our skin in the game as well. Councilmember Muhlenberg, any comments?
Not right now.
Not right now. Open it to my colleagues. Any thoughts on an ending number? Or what it might represent? Yes.
So, much as I hate to, not that I hate to agree with you at all, but that, just I hate to agree with your particular comment about the amount that should be there.
No one meant not what it said.
It's recorded now.
Yeah, I had held last year that, the one-time expenditures for one-time revenue sources, and I'm beginning to realize that's an unrealistic position. That in fact, holding on to the money forever like that is not necessarily helpful for the community, especially if we don't have a really good plan for investing in the community, that kind of funding. So in the absence of a plan like that, I am happy to start bleeding that one off then. Well, not happy, but willing to bleed off some of that. So some figure between the 1 to 1.2 million that Director Vaughn has mentioned that allows our cash flow to be smooth, and the 6 million that we were arguing for last time would seem to be an appropriate thing. I hesitate to drop all the way down to the 1.2 just because of some of the things that Councilmember Good said, that we don't know what we don't know.
Mhm.
So I'm for a happy meeting somewhere about 3.5 million, just to put a number out there.
Okay. Now, remember, we have sequestered the funds for the Strategic Opportunity Fund. So
Absolutely.
we do still have that in this spreadsheet, about 2.2-ish million to 2.4. Now I can't remember. 6 + 8, 2.4 million.
Yes.
Is our target for funding in this next biennium. Um. If we were to look at, well, can we just do
What's the matter?
the levy rate that is identical to what we had last year? So let's start there. We have a
20.
so
Yeah.
see what, let's just, so we can all be, what happens if that's the 24 cents? That's what we were asking for, and we are just shy of 3 million.
And
So
let's make sure that we're very clear about what the total levy revenue represents. That represents literally a 6-year period. I don't want it out there that a total levy revenue then is representing what the city would receive on an annual basis, because that's not a true statement. So maybe we need to also add a box that shows an annual versus the total,
That
because
would
I
be
think,
helpful.
that's, it didn't even dawn on me until we put the dollar amount in there. I was like, 8.8, that, I mean, instantly I knew,
mhm.
but had I not, if I was a resident of the community, that would be, I would be like 8 million a year, 8.8. And so I can see how that quickly could be misunderstood.
Yes.
So I want to be mindful of that. So we'll make that improvement.
And for those following along, the light gray is a 2-year number, so we can kind of see how it works on the biennium. Annual will be approximately half. Councilmember Muhlenberg, you had your hand up.
Yeah, are we set on a 6-year levy and not a 10-year levy?
So there are rules around that. So you can either do there's 4 options for an actual levy lid lift, and that is a single year lift. So you ask one time for one bump. Then you do there's a multi-year levy lid lift, which is an increase. That's when you see things like built in the CPI, which is what the city did elect to do in 2025. And so that is a 6-year levy. That's the only other option that we have on what we would define as a temporary levy. And then you can do a single year permanent levy. And a permanent literally means exactly that. You do a single lift of a dollar amount, and then it is permanent at that lift. And then there is another option where you do a variable, and it's also permanent. You do like one that includes CPI, and it's permanent. So there are 4 options to a levy, and that might be something that we need to bring back. Budget Chair Riddle, to go back over from MRSC has a great explanation on walking through their levies. I didn't think to go back over that.
If I may, I think what Councilmember Muhlenberg is referring to is House Bill 2442, which was passed this year. And it changes the limit. Instead of 6 years, we can do a multi-year levy for up to 10 years now.
Oh, apologies.
Yeah.
Is that what you were referring to? Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly, yes.
So there's strategy to that. It gives us some stability of knowledge of what's coming, but one of my thoughts is, because we're sort of doing this, we're committing some of our savings as we're going through this levy. And at some point, we're gonna expend our savings. And it would be, I think, a good strategic, position to be in, where then we could have another levy after that would rebalance things. Because we will no longer have our own funds to bring to the table in the quantity that we are right now. Yes, Councilmember Muhlenberg?
I don't want this to be an inflammatory statement, but my experience as a resident here in Lake Forest Park is that the city has spent the money that it brings in through revenue in a very short period of time from generating that revenue. And what I mean by that is examples of like the period where the mall sold 2 times. That money was one-time revenue for us because the sale of the mall is a unique thing that happens. Yet somehow all of those funds got consumed and spent and are gone. What I want to see the city get to is a place where we can understand what our sales tax revenue is and our property tax revenue is. And we get to a budgeting place where at the end of each biennium, we expect that to net out to zero. And if there are unexpected things like care funds or ARPA funds or the mall sells, or there's a massive amount of development, so we get these windfalls of new development revenues that come in, that should all be extra that gets moved off to the side to be community development funds, because they were one-time funds that came in through a unique way that we're going to commit to putting back into our community to invest in things like parks, like sidewalks, like roundabouts, like whatever. Yeah, Tom.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, just as a point of clarification, Matt, and your point is very well taken. Just a reminder that the sale of the mall, that's REIT, so that's restricted to property acquisition and pertinent uses by state statute. So that's the money that REIT has been used for, and still is in play. Like for the Rose property, we're getting that money. We've got money back, I guess, from conservation futures. But the other ones, absolutely, ARPA, CARES, those are general fund one-time revenues. So yeah, I clearly hear you about the when we get these bonuses, if you will, that are outside of the normal purview of what we expect, or predictions of what we expect, they should be pushed off to the side for investing in the community. 100%.
And I think one of the challenges we have right now is that what it would take to balance our expenditures to our current revenue would be significant. Because our budget is generally so much smaller than many of the cities around us, the impact is just greater. $2.5 million impact here is 10%, but in another city it might be 2%, and then that can be accommodated. I don't see us on a healthy path trying to get us balanced right now. I think the idea would be that's an amazing place to be at, but let's get ourselves balanced first, and then let's hold the line, if you will, as much as we can. I just don't think that we would be able to deliver the services that the community expects if we were to make the cuts now and then try to hold that line. That's my approach.
I wasn't suggesting making any cuts. I was suggesting that if I'm going to be comfortable with a levy rate and a levy term, my objective would be a levy rate that establishes a balanced budget on a consecutive year basis, and we can sustain the city on that. And we learn to grow within the confines of what that projected growth in that revenue is. And we don't get back into this situation where we felt like we had all this money and our budget has creeped up as a result of that. And now we're in a place where those one-time dollars are running out, and we've got to scramble to say, well, how are we going to shrink back into the revenue footprint that we're actually generating here? So I wasn't advocating for cuts. I was trying to seek information to inform what I think is a reasonable levy rate to request.
You bet.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the clarification. Councilman Goldman.
Yeah, I'll have a go at trying to answer the two questions that have been posed. So the first 6 years versus 10 years. I'm inclined to like a 6-year levy. Currently in our budget, we're doing a 6-year budget forecast. So I think it makes sense to tie a 6-year budget forecast with a 6-year levy. But I could be convinced otherwise. And then in terms of what do we want the general fund to look like in 6 years, I would say, for me, I'd say about $2 million seems like a good, there's that sort of 2 million in the opportunity fund, 2 million in the general fund. That feels like a good place to be. But again, I'm not set in stone on either of those answers.
I have a question on this spreadsheet. It just goes out to 2032. Okay, so if we do it, so we don't know what it would do. Okay.
Yeah, our financial forecasts are 6-year forecasts.
And then another thing, it's also good to be cognizant of our residents, and everybody else is also hit with increases that are happening, across the board. So, I would want us to be mindful of that also. And, can we put in 20 cents to see what that would give us.
So that brings us real close to Director Vaughn's sort of minimum. We're of flexible money to be able to balance the highs and lows of our revenue streams. So I think 22, we look at 22 real quick, just to kind of gauge some middle. I think that gets into right about 2 million. And then I think Councilmember Muhlenberg, I mean, that might be kind of the time where we start saying like, okay, now how do we make this perpetually balanced? The one thing I appreciate about a 6-year levy myself is we've never had a levy pass, and the community has not seen us be successful managing their money with a levy. And I think having a 6-year period, one, we have a little more confidence in what the numbers might look like. But two, it gives us time to just simply prove to the community that we are capable of managing this new money that is not going to be, spent unwisely. And once we have their confidence, then we can have a discussion about the next levy, because I doubt things will miraculously get less expensive on the whole. So I think this feels like a good thing, a 6-year levy, and I'm kind of liking where the 22 might be landing.
I agree with you on that, and I think that if because it's one thing to do all the work and actually go out for a levy. It's another one to have everybody vote for it. So I think that if you come back and the city's done all of this work to show and to provide backup for the reasons why, I think 22 cents is lower than what it was before. So that shows that the city's done more work. And I think it would have a higher chance of passing. That's just my 2 cents on it.
Councilmember Rosenau.
Yeah, I agree with what you were saying about the 6-year levy. I mean, I think about, schools, there are plenty of examples of other bodies that have something on a similar scale where people see it working. And the thing that I worry about, there's two ends of this that I worry about. And one, in terms of trying to pick that line 25 number that's going to work out for us, is that there's all the downside risk that we were talking about, even putting in a little bit of extra allowance for unanticipated, unmodeled inflation. I just don't know where anything's going to be in 6 years, and I would rather, I don't want to shave it too close. And so 2 billion feels, if we don't want to land below 1.5, 2 million feels close. And so something a little bit further, I can't remember what the earlier suggestion was, if it was 3 or 3.5, but somewhere a little bit further north of 1.5 feels safer. Also because I am optimistic that everything will go well, that people will have confidence, and that at eventual renewal, if that's what we ask people for, will be smooth. But if there is any hiccup and we do need to do another stutter stop and go back, having some sort of buffer there might be good to be able to go into that conversation. And I don't want to, if we do have that downside risk in terms of higher costs, if we do all of this and we're still in a crunch and not able to provide people the services that they are expecting, I think it's going to raise other questions that are going to be a lot harder to answer. So I would rather put in a little, not shave it too close, is I guess what I would say. And so the 22 cents that we're looking at here, I agree that it's nice that it's a little bit lower than what we were asking for last time, but it still gives us that margin. I don't know. It feels risky.
Okay.
I don't have a number in mind, but it feels risky.
We're not voting on a number right now, so yes, that your stream of thought was really important to hear. Deputy Mayor. for Tony. Sorry about that last time.
Well, and I just wanted to thank all you silver tongue devils out there who are talking me out of taxing myself more. So appreciate that much. But my point is basically that in fact, I like the idea that we do need something a little bit more than what Director Vaughn has suggested as a minimum to meet our month-to-month expenditures. I also like the idea that if you look at the glide path, it's a very smooth glide path for that ending fund balance. It's not any year takes a particularly big hit. Now, I can imagine the council in 2031 or two starting to panic a bit because we're starting to hit that magic number where we don't want to go too much forward. But as you pointed out, Chair, one of the most important things is to establish trust with our community. And if we can establish that, yes, over that time period, we manage the money well. We're still able to provide the services everybody's know to come and love. We've even managed to basically make things a little bit better here because the Lakefront Park opened and all this stuff. I think that goes a long way to showing basically that we're willing to do our work and that the community's work is rewarded. So I'm happy to go with the numbers you guys are suggesting.
Appreciate your comment. Mr. Mayor, did you have a
Yeah,
thought?
just quickly, your comments are really appropriate, Deputy Mayor. I mean, I think that the question of the public trust when it comes to asking them for additional funds and tying that into what Councilmember Muhlenberg said, Matt, it really is the corollary to Parkinson's law, in finance. I don't know what the word is. There's probably some law in there in finance where the amount of the budget, the expenditures will expand to the amount of budget allotted to it, right? And so I really feel very strongly that that we have done a very good job and can continue to do a very good job of keeping expenditures down. The challenge, as you all know, is that the inflationary pressures and the costs that are being mandated upon us and that are unfunded from Olympia continue to be a real challenge. And we hear that day in, day out from our counterparts in other cities. And so to your point, Deputy Mayor, that question of the public trust, it really is, we are not asking the public if you all choose to go out for a levy, we're not asking the public to fund additional services. We are asking the public to say, to allow us to keep the level of services that we have and make sure that we're secure with a little bit of buffer for inflationary pressures, which we know are rampant.
Thank you, Mayor.
Again, I want to reiterate that the community is also feeling these pressures from, their tax rates going up, their gas rates, food, everything is, so just, I want us to be mindful of that. Because they're getting a double hit.
Mm-hmm.
We all are. Oh, so.
Yeah. I think appreciate kind of keeping that ending balance, unallocated funds low, but not in a risky area is the best sort of trajectory. Director Vaughn.
I'm gonna take a moment to highlight again how fiscally responsible all of your directors, your departments have operated. And so just a reminder that, we have had challenges on our past budgets with when we went through the pandemic. We had to just tighten the belt to absolutely the leanest pieces of meat. We were down to, there's no more fat in our budget. And we were very cautiously built it back. And we've done zero-based budgeting. This city has gone through every exercise to be so fiscally responsible across the entire board. But still, through that, every single person that works for the city, in addition to all of the directors, lead roles, partners, we've been so fiscally responsible that I just want to remind you that is where we have grown. We've done the opposite of what other cities have done. I really want to highlight, it's not just a finance thing. We've done a fantastic job through this committee on our investment policy. We made great changes there to create budgetable money on a revenue stream. But ultimately, we've also built trust internally And just if we don't need to purchase something, if we don't need to buy something, if we can get innovative on a different way, a way to pivot, to look at something different, to ask a vendor to meet us in the middle to match a budget, or this is what my budget is, how can you meet me at this price? Every single department head has done that, has shown up, has asked for those really tight, and if we don't need to spend money, I don't, building that concept of, even if the trends don't look perfect, we'll tell the story, whatever it looks like. And it isn't always easy when you go through these budgets and the trends are wonky, but ultimately it's just being so fiscally responsible with all of the every single person's money and every single penny that comes into this city, and how we advocate for our grants. Our city administrator is the one that went after the grant that we just received back for the Rose property. So we purchased that at 1.6 and we received 1.2 back. It does go over a couple years. Sometimes we have to be patient. We received those same funds for the 5 Acre Woods. We've received so much support from our state, our federal. Our lobbyists have done a fantastic job for us. So I know that's an expenditure, but it's leveraging amazing, financial grants and loans and stuff that are coming back to this city. So you're able to do more projects, but just it isn't just the one-time funds. I do want to keep highlighting how your departments show up for this city, every single person on a daily basis, to be mindful about how we spend money. So and that is how we have walked into this and grown this situation where we have built our fund balance. So internally, we take it very seriously too, that we are asking people to step up and ask for, when groceries are going up, fuel is going up. You go to the pump and it's like, wow, it's over $6 for fuel. This is insane. But we are understanding that. We are being mindful of that internally. And I want that to be very, very public, that every single person in this city is showing up for this community in that manner. And I'm the voice, but everybody is doing it. And so I just want to remind very publicly that that is also how we build this balance. And so I think internally, we just want it out that we are very, very aware that we don't take asking the public for a levy lid lift of any kind lightly, in any way, shape, or form. So
Yes, and thank you for grounding us in the hard work that has happened on the administration side of things. And I appreciate that we allow them to find those innovations. That's great. I have seen Councilmember Rosenau's hand up for a while.
And I was actually going to say some of the same things that you just said, and I have seen that also from the city staff, just the dedication to keeping this lean and keeping things efficient, and the way that everyone is just pitching in is I think is really inspiring, and I think more of the community should see that and understand that. It does also, it inspires the flip side of that is, in these years that have been very lean and where people have been pulling back, there may be areas of deferred maintenance or other things that, or people who have been generous with us about contracts because they know that we're in this tight situation that can't persist forever. And is there any risk there that of inflation that is not built into these models? Like, that's I don't want us to be caught short-footed. No, that's not the word. Whatever the word is that I'm looking for, in 5 years, right? That would be my fear. Is there, and the other thing that had occurred to me, that maybe you already thought of this already and I'm just catching up. But even if last November we had done a 24-cent levy lid lift, with the inflation adjustment next year, it would already be higher than that. And so when we think about, setting it lower than I mean, for the voter, it may not register on this level, but in terms of my own thinking, at least, the comparison to if something had passed last year is not really 24 cents, it's some higher number.
Noted.
It's variable. That number is variable on an annual basis. So I want to be careful just stating that it constantly goes up. So that number is the levy rate is a variable number. So I want that to be.
Yeah, the levy rate is hard to calculate after the first year.
Right, because of property value. Yeah, no, yes.
But I hear what you're saying, that the impact probably would have gone up due to the CPI. And we're kind of trying to address coming in under that to listen as we've been listening to our community. Councilmember Goldman and then Mayor.
Yeah.
First, I just want to say I really appreciate that we're taking such a data-driven approach to figure out, what do we want the budget to look like, and then using that to come up with potential levy numbers. I also went back and I looked at our one pager that we did last year. So if the levy raises $8 million over 6 years, that's roughly $1.3 million per year. And so do we have $1.3 million of increased public safety costs? And the answer is yes. If you add up, jail costs, dispatch, prosecutor, public defender, police vehicles, salaries, we definitely, so I think that means we can make the case to the community that we're not just looking for a slush fund, that the money this levy is raising is directly tied to the increased costs for us to maintain our police department.
I would argue it's not a slush fund at all.
Oh, just trying to preempt potential arguments.
Yeah.
Well, I think you covered part of what I was going to say, Larry. Thank you. I think that there's sort of there are two factors. There's the ongoing, sort of CPIU pressures, what everybody's experiencing at the gas pump and all those different things, utilities, et cetera, as well. And then you have these new resets that we've had when it comes to jail costs, dispatch costs, those all the costs, those things have what was close to $900,000, just a massive bump. That's the new norm. And so it's sort of it's like I don't know what the analogy is, but it is they're the two things that are pushing things up. Hopefully we don't get those huge leaps. Hopefully it's a little bit more, steady. And I mean that in kind of a negative sense, but also in a positive sense that it's a little more predictable. Those big jumps, the 900,000 or whatever the total was over the recent year is that those you can't anticipate. And that's what has put us in this place. If you look at the numbers, that's where we are. And you add into the mix some of the state mandated things that we have to pay for. You think about our environmental considerations, surface water, those continue to expand under state statute.
We do. And we want
to support
to support,
You
because
bet.
it's good work. It's
Yeah.
feeding into clean streams and climate and
Absolutely.
but it does cost money.
Exactly.
I think so. I had 4 things that I said we need to kind of start narrowing down before we can have kind of formal deliberations on what our resolution would look like. The reserve, done. The strategic opportunity fund, we've done. Ending balance target, kind of right at or just above 2 million seems to be what I'm hearing from this group. So somewhere like that, no less than the 1.5, because that's, I think, we agree it's a bit risky once we get down there. And then what levy rate yields that we kind of see right now is about 0.22, 22 cents per thousand. Next steps, now that we kind of have a framework of what we might want to be putting in front of us to sign, I've got, you guys got a copy of this last Thursday. This is just straight from King County. So these are the King County dates and such. It's not necessarily our internal dates, but the last date we can file a resolution is by August 4th. And then, of course, that second half of August is a lot of vacations and stuff, and that's when the pro-con statements and such need to be done, so. You know, we do want to be ahead of this schedule. I was hoping to have a conversation with Matt of kind of like where we would be. Did you happen to talk to him or?
Absolutely did.
So. Lindsay has pinch hitted for me and got that information. Are you ready?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So, from the city clerk's perspective, basically, even kind of mirroring what occurred last year, that first meeting in July is kind of the last meeting, in order to adopt the resolution. And once we've drafted a resolution, internally, we'll send it off and get the assessor to review it. From the, sorry, not the assessor, the levy admin, their department, it's not exactly the King County assessors, but it's that department. That's always what I've done in the past in order to make sure they have the lens of making sure all of the i's are dotted and t's are crossed. And so, but that final date is pretty much, if it could be done prior to July 9th, that would be even more helpful to allow the pro and the con committee statements to be published and put out, advertised, etc. from his standpoint. And then, yeah, I think it's then August 4th is the last day to file. However, we want that completed in July. We don't want to be walking into August without that being completed. And having confirmations back from King County that they've received that resolution. And intent, the city's intent. And then it does walk down into the explanatory statement. That's where we lean directly to our attorney. Because then it's a factual written out. So we tend to lean to a third party in order to write that statement from the resolution standpoint. So it's just very fact-based, very, and then it walks into the pro-con statements. The rebuttals are due then shortly after that, about August 13th. Then it walks down to the voter pamphlet, the proofs are sent, and so and then a response within the next 4 days. And pretty much then in October, the pamphlets go out. And so I don't know if you were wanting me to walk that far ahead.
No, I think we kind of know what happens after that. It's the frenzy of getting your packet in and getting till the last minute. So looking at, July 9th being the very last day that we can get our resolution done.
I don't know what happened to the audio in the room, and sorry to just interrupt, but I can no longer really hear anybody. It was perfect, and then Summer started talking and it disappeared.
Okay. Any better? Is it still gone?
Keep going. It's getting better.
Okay, I'll just keep talking. I'm good at that. So looking at what dates we have available, first meeting in June is the 9th, or July 9th. So right after the 4th of July weekend. Before that, we have a June 25th, a June 11th, and then the May 28th business meetings. I am trying to remember if we did
We have to schedule a
hearing.
public hearing, yeah.
So we're gonna want to schedule that hearing fairly soon, I believe, so that we have time to really hear from the community.
Right.
To make sure we really get it right.
I think we might need to double check that. I'm not sure if a public hearing is required on this.
I'm trying to remember from last year.
I think we had always invited the community for feedback. We've always always invited them to come in and have a conversation.
But maybe not an actual hearing.
When we talk about public hearings, that's a legal requirement. So I just want to make sure
Yeah.
I mean, we're always going to invite, let's be very clear, we're always going to invite feedback from the community at any meeting.
Yeah.
However, I don't think that an actual public hearing is required on this one. I would have remembered that. I would have remembered it because I probably would have been the one presenting it.
Oh, well, that's probably true. So we will, we need enough time to do community engagement.
Absolutely.
In order to, get, enough buy-in that we're in the right direction before
Would we want to
do
present
that.
something?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
We need retouches, right?
of course, we would. So but those touches can be work sessions and cows as well. I would like to see that we,
There's a newsletter going out.
and what's
At what
the
point,
date?
at what point, I can't, Mayor, I might be leaning to you. on this
Oh,
one.
I'm sorry, yes.
At what point are we internally supposed to, I can't recall exactly when we're supposed to just be very factual based.
It's
Is it once the resolution
is
is
passed, it
adopted?
goes into effect.
Okay.
So,
Mhm.
yeah, so what I would suggest, if I may, having talked to Clerk McLean about this as well. July 9th that's absolutely last
Mhm.
end of story. And being considerate of the team and making sure that if you want to proceed with this, I would urge you to consider moving forward post haste and get it sorted either at one of the two business meetings in June. The 11th is probably better, but the 25th is certainly something that is tenable. And having said that, again, the idea is, I mean, we have a very strict, the state mandates very strict sort of guidelines about what we can say after, any of us can say after it's adopted. So at the same time, there other cities are moving forward right now, and they have. So I think we want to be, there's plenty of time to have the conversation factually going forward, not to suggest anybody's not going to be stating the facts. No.
So
Yes,
just,
Deputy Mayor.
in fact, this is exactly what we did last year. July 10th was the meeting in which we approved for the November ballot that particular proposition one levy limit.
So we do have the resolution from last year that has a lot of
Same
the same language and it's so what about bringing that to the next, because we have it, just bringing it into next, council meeting
Next week.
next week? Because we don't have the cow with Memorial Day.
There's a
But-
cow at 6 on 28th.
Yes.
Oh, we're doing a pre-cow, that's right.
So would that be a cat?
We are coming up on 7:30. He's gonna replace better. So we will continue, I think, having conversation with the administration, but I think it makes sense to bring that prior resolution to the CAF on May 28th. And then we can, if we need to, have some follow-up conversation during the council meeting, depending on how packed that meeting ends up being. So that'll get us at least one touch there. And then the 11th might be a good time to bring the community in, if we don't want to make a special meeting to bring the community in for conversation.
We could do a special meeting.
We could,
Yeah.
we're getting more engaged in doing that, so
I recommend that myself.
yes,
Special meeting, what
For
is,
specifically for this process.
for more of it, perhaps it'd be more of an open dialogue versus a business meeting. Yeah.
who
knows?
The request was completely understood. What, are you thinking about a date already? Or no?
Well, I
Just-
mean, as soon as possible, whatever, what date everybody can accommodate. I think that there is a time crunch, definitely.
It would be nice by like perhaps
I'm thinking that.
I'm inviting, throwing out
By
the
the-
dates
yeah,
and
first
if we're having
I
a
was-
conversation to just
But-
maybe,
Yeah, first.
Yeah, before the 11th meeting for sure.
Yeah, but how about the
Before
week
June
before?
11th meeting, if we could do a community engagement,
June 4th.
we could do 4th.
Okay.
Yeah, because that's the first Thursday, so it's open.
what would that, it would be a special meeting
Mhm.
for just the one topic.
Mm-hmm. Levy budget, like topic.
There's nothing else city-wise going on that day, right? Is there a committee,
Yes.
one of the advisory committee meetings?
Thursday.
I see parks on my calendar.
Okay, parks,
Okay.
that's what it is, yeah.
Well, so the Parks and Rec board is meeting actually June 2nd.
Second.
But there is something, Public Works has something on the calendar in the council
Council
chambers.
Okay.
We'll have to find
Is
out.
that a
what
roundabout
is.
or is that?
Who knows?
I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think if we are gonna have a more informal meeting with the community outside the chambers may be appropriate. So we could talk about that. I don't know how quickly the city can organize something like that, but
June,
for June 4th. So
it's sounding like June 4th, literally the council chambers are reserved.
are busy anyway, so yeah.
So, well, it would have to be.
Well, let's do this.
We can do
You
this a
guys
little
might wanna-
offline.
Yeah,
I'm
we
not
can-
sure
we
what
can-
what
We'll
meeting
talk.
that is.
Talk about it.
Yeah.
Bring
Okay.
your calendars to
Bring
the
your
cal and
calendars
and
to
to the regular business meeting next week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll continue this discussion next week.
Meanwhile, I'll work with administration to figure out what dates are actually there.
Yeah.
In this building, yeah, so I think everybody's have.
Yes, I have two hands up. Muhlenberg, I think you were first, Councilmember Miller.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind the chair that there is a committee, a subcommittee on communication that's been put together. We're meeting this weekend, we hope. I think on Sunday morning, we're still trying to sort out a final time. But the June 4th or whatever date should be part of that overall conversation as well. And we'll come back with some feedback to the entire council.
Absolutely wonderful. To have you, put that into your bucket. Councilmember Rosenau.
And one thing that we had spoken about before in that regard was possibly doing events outside City Hall. I don't know if this would be an appropriate place to do that, or if that would be logistically messy for the clerks and everyone else. But if June 4th is not available at City Hall, might there be a school gymnasium or other community venue that would maybe draw a bigger crowd and highlight that this is an opportunity? We don't have to decide anything. I will just float the notion and see where it goes.
I would just offer that any outside venue is gonna take at least 3 weeks to set up.
Okay.
Standpoint, getting it organized. Again, I want to be really sensitive to that. I appreciate your enthusiasm, Councilmember Rose. Now, I think it just takes time and facilitation, and there's a lot going on right now coming up. Chief retirement, all sorts of things that are in the pipeline as well for events. So, but the preference would be to do it on site. We can, in terms of logistically, it would be easier.
That makes sense. Thank you.
So we've got at least a couple of dates. Next week at the CAF, we're gonna see last year's resolution to kind of get a handle on what might apply to us this year, what we want to tweak. We'll have some community engagement meeting somewhere around the 4th. And then we can start kind of digging into specific resolution stuff on the 11th, on June 11th, during the business meeting and the work session. Okay, so we got a little short term. Appreciate Councilman Muhlenberg bringing that community meeting kind of into your communications. Look forward to hearing your committee's thoughts on that and helping out. Anything else for the good of the order? Okay, hearing none at 7:28. What? No.
I was like, wow. I just said, wow.
At 7:28, the Budget and Finance Committee meeting has been adjourned.
everybody.
Thank you so
We were
much
all
for-
together yesterday, so nothing new has accumulated since then, I guess.
Congrats, my friend.